Growing up in the 1930s, he fell in love with the railroads. The great locomotives, puffing and panting as they hauled their unimaginable loads, seemed less like machines than mythical creatures, some species of mastodon, as a book of the time put it. To watch the beam of light from the great monsters' headlamps, to glimpse the hellish fire lighting the interior of the cab, to see the shadow of the fireman silhouetted against the glow. All this was to experience the thrill and terror of industry and progress, to see precisely what was meant by the American century. From around the age of 11, the young Alan collected train timetables, memorized the routes and the towns along the way, and imagined himself traveling the continent, Duluth to Minneapolis, Minneapolis to Fargo, and then onward and westward to Helena, Spokane, and finally Seattle. It was a way of conjuring a world beyond Washington Heights, the neighborhood of immigrants he inhabited on the northern tongue of Manhattan. A way of escaping the squat red-brick apartment building with its ornate stucco moldings, of freeing his mind from the too familiar streets filled with European accents, Yiddish, Irish, and German. Washington Heights had been developed just a few years earlier, after the New York subway stretched north to reach it in 1906. But although the subway had arrived, you could still see horses on the streets, and men who cleaned up after them. No wonder the railroad seemed romantic. Alan lived with his grandparents, Nathan and Anna Goldsmith, and with his doting mother, Rose. They shared a one-bedroom apartment at 600 West 163rd Street. Nathan and Anna had the bedroom, while Alan and Rose slept in what had been built as the dining room. It was a modest accommodation for 4 people, but it seemed a reasonable lot, better than the crowded tenements of the Lower East Side, where other immigrants lived, and not bad, given that the country was in the grip of the Depression. The Goldsmiths lived on the west side of Broadway, the dividing line that separated the salubrious part of the neighborhood from the rough-and-tumble east. The gentility of the neighborhood, along with the style of the buildings, the parks nearby, and the cool breeze from the Hudson in the evening, carried vague reminders of the bourgeois sections of German cities, a contemporary wrote. German immigrants flocked to Washington Heights in such numbers that the area was sometimes known as Frankfurt on the Hudson. To Nathan and Anna, born in Russia, driven to migrate to Hungary and then from Hungary to America, life in New York must have seemed a blessing almost divine. They had boarded their grandson's imaginary train, and after much adventure had arrived safely. As for Rose, born in Hungary, though now as American as baseball, there was much to celebrate too. She had a steady job as a salesperson at the Ludwig Baumann furniture store in the Bronx, which paid enough to meet the rent of $48 each month, keep food on the table, and even spare Alan $25 a week for pocket money. Besides, she was happy to be living just half a block away from her sister, the well-to-do Mary. In summer, Alan would stay with Mary at her vacation house close to Rockaway Beach, on the near end of Long Island. Alan and his cousin Wesley would spend hours walking the sands with their heads down, searching doggedly for lost coins. Then they would spend the fruits of their labor on candy. Rose's greatest blessing was young Alan himself, born on March 6, 1926, the product of her brief marriage to Herbert Greenspan. The boy naturally expanded to fill the gaps in Rose's life, the husband who had left when their son was still small, the absence of other children. Each morning her young hero, with his perfectly even features and broad smile, would soldier off to the PS 169 elementary school on Audubon Avenue, and each afternoon he would return with extraordinary things. From very early on, he could add large numbers in his head, and seemed even to enjoy it. Rose trotted him out in front of aunts and uncles to perform. Alan, "What's 35 plus 92?" she would ask. "127," came back the answer.